Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it's noon on Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, and whatever time it is in your zone. And this is Writing Wednesday, where I talk about the writing craft, the art, the psychology, the philosophy. I answer your writing questions, whatever they might be. And if you have questions for me in between Wednesdays, um, write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com. There's a contact form, and send me your question. I can do a whole Writing Wednesday around your question, because if you have a question, many people have a question. Um, and today, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll chat about stuff. So, hi, Wendy. Good to see you. Hi, Hope. Excellent to see you. Um, Hope writing's been going well for me, for you, as it is for me at the moment. Hi, Jennifer. Good to see you. Um, it is definitely October. We got a bit of rain here. This is my lint. I know you, but it always throws me your lint. um, yeah. Well, welcome to Writing Wednesday, and I have a really good question today. Hi, Sarah. Um, I have a very good question today, which is, what makes a story truly stay with a reader long after they've finished it? So, in other words, how to make your work unforgettable. And I think this is such a great question, because haven't we all read books that we enjoyed at the time, and yet a week later, if somebody asks us about it, we can't remember a thing about it? Not good. So let's look a little bit deeper into what we remember, what makes a book memorable. I don't think that there is a popular book in the world that doesn't have things that make it memorable for us. And I think it's a good idea to take a moment and think about the books that you've loved, that you tell people about, that you remember a week later, a month later, um, a year later, years later, you still remember. What is it that you remember about those books? Um, well, I think the first thing is usually the pleasure you had in reading it. You have this overall feeling when the name of that book comes to you, or when you see it on your shelf, you remember, God, I really enjoyed that book. So pleasure is always a good thing, and I don't think any writer in the world is going to overlook that element. Yes, if you give your reader intense pleasure reading your book, they will remember their feeling about it. But also, it is a geek love. Hope says, by Catherine Dunn, really freaked me out, and I've never forgotten it. So it has the intensity, um, especially of certain scenes, I assume. Uh, the intensity of scenes will grab you, will stay with you. You'll always remember that scene. Um, I know they, my husband wrote a really great book about comedy writing. So this is, it's a lot of his stuff has value for screenwriters and for people who write comedy, uh, um, sketch writers, and so on. But he has a wonderful little um, section in here on line, moment, and scene, which is just tells you so much about what makes things memorable. He's talking about comedy, but it could be, you know, he's talking about film, mostly film and TV. But it could be just as applicable to any narrative form. Um, and a line, a good line. You always remember a good line. Um, he uses as an example of a good line is the difference between um, I just saw a shark and it's huge, and you're going to need a bigger boat. So we always talk about writing dialogue, especially that the best actors in the world are going to want to say no straight man, and uh, really looking for that $1 million line, you will remember you're going to need a bigger boat. Often with, especially with films, but also with stories. People, good dialogue, good lines. You remember that so and so always has really good lines. Um, Jennifer, lots of love from London. How wonderful. Asks, what do you think undermines a great line? Great lines have compression usually. They are not what everyone would say. If everyone, a line everyone should say is a line everyone could say is a line no one should say in fiction. Um, so, what undermines a great line is too long, not an original metaphor, not an original twist, nothing that an actor would go, wow, that's some good dialogue. Um, that conventionality undermines a great line. Using exposition in dialogue, that's not ever going to give you great lines. Um, I think that great dialogue, you'll always remember, like certain James Bond lines. I mean, those are not great books. But some of the snappy lines are just wonderful, and people will remember them. Um, the most important line, of course, in a novel is the end, the last line, that makes the whole book reverberate in your mind. Um, and writers should spend a great deal of time and effort working on the last line of the book and the opening line of the book. Um, that the opening line gets everybody's attention. Everybody always remembers, you know, all all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unique in its own way. I'm paraphrasing, but the opening of Anna Karenina, everybody always remembers that, and then to have a bang up last line. Uh, you work for it, and make sure that it reverberates back through the book. Um, I don't have examples at hand, so I can say that when I finally arrived at the last line um, of White Oleander, that's something that people always remember in that book, which is I'll always know what time it is in California. Um, look at your books and see who's got great opening line, great closing line, and then generally, trying to end every chapter with a good line is, and every paragraph with a good line, but especially the ending. Look at the ending lines of memorable short stories and memorable novels. You often, it's the last line you remember, or you remember the opener. Um, in films, certainly the great lines of dialogue, um, because that's all the reader is going to, I mean, it's all the viewer is going to remember as dialogue because they're not seeing it on the page. You don't have to do that in fiction. It's often a good line is just the way she described. I would talked about Mary Gaitskill's Veronica, which was such a masterful book. Um, and she makes there are lines that are unforgettable. I'll never forget the way she described music and the way that they lived in the music at that time. I remember lines. There's a line in several lines in Under the Volcano, which is one of my favorite books. One of which is the only thing. I mean, just a remarkable line. Describing the Farolito, which is the mezcal bar. This is a guy who's drinking himself to death in the Day of the Dead, 1939, in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And he describes this filthy hole of a mezcal bar that only opens at 4 in the morning. And he calls it the Farolito, the paradise of his despair. Oh my God, I'll never forget that line ever. Um, Something beautifully described, succinctly and beautifully described, is a line that will make your book memorable. And the more of them, the more memorable. I talked last week about checking in the margins when somebody does something, the author does something right. You get a little check, and then you can go back through. Some people underline. Uh, um, I think that there are many such lines in Kundera's uh, the unbearable lightness of being, which, if I have a copy of it at arm's reach, I will grab it. I do. My Kundera, my unbearable lightness. I actually have two copies because one of them is so heavily checked and underlined that I had to buy a second copy for a cleaner read. So I guess I didn't underline this heavily, but there's so many good lines in this. I remember, you know, the character. Um, uh, oh God, what was her name? Sabina, talking about growing up under communism and how she hated anything having to do with organized anything, especially organized celebrations, marches, and so forth. And what that meant to her. There was, so many good lines in this. Well, I'll have to look in the copy that's upstairs that's covered with check marks. Um, if you find a book without lines that you just don't need to read again or know again and stuff, those are the books that are not memorable. You will forget them. But those books that you put big check marks and you underlined and you highlighted and you wrote lines in your journal, which I do all the time, um, those will be forgettable. So you remember a good line, a good description, a vivid image. Um, and that's what I check mark is a memorable line, something often that tells you something about life. You get a big check mark. It was the paradise of his despair. I mean, sheer brilliance and understanding of the human the human being. Let's see if I can find something that's been marked up like mad. Well, I know that this copy of Under the Volcano, I actually have two copies of this too because I've marked this one up so badly. Um, uh, Sarah says, when I get a library book and want to buy it for myself and take the time to copy annotations from sticky notes to my own copy, that's a keeper. Yeah. So this one is just covered with check marks and notes in the margin. Um, things like uh, just repeated lines. He talks about um, Oaxaca. There's a divorce. We don't know. We just know there's something about Oaxaca, and then 40 pages later it says Oaxaca meant divorce, and that's like, wow, there's some storytelling. Um, he talks about. He has a lot of images that repeat. There's a movie playing in town, Las Manos de Orlac with Peter Lorre, the hands of Orlac, where the hands of this pianist, are a murderer's hands. Um, so it's sort of like being divorced in the body. That's I always remember Las Manos de Orlac. Um, I remember uh, just so many things um, appear. It could be an image that keeps reappearing. In this book, there's pariah dogs. The dogs that just appear various places uh, in the story, just strays. Um, but they signal something. And I always remember the pariah dogs. I remember there's a canyon, a barranca, that that zigzags its way through the town. And because the guy's a drunk, it's always a threat because that he'll fall into the abyss. But because of course he is falling into the abyss. Um, so sometimes a repeated image, a piece of the landscape will be memorable, stick in your head, and you'll never divorce that from the book, and you'll always think about that. Um, yeah, getting a library book is, for me, it's when I get a library book and want to buy it for myself. And I take the time to copy the annotations from the sticky notes. That's the difficulty of the library book is A, you're not supposed to mark it up, and B, you don't have it physically. So I often repurchase things. I'm listening to a lot of stuff on audio now, and it has the same problem. If something sticks to me, if I just need to own it, and then I can mark it up. So often I'll hear it on audio and then buy the book because it's just not enough to hear it once. I want to linger over those passages and mark them up. Um, I especially even working on a Kobo or a Kindle type of e-reader, you can't mark it up the same way you mark up I mean, you can, but the ability to flip through the book like this, that's hard to do with anything. Nothing is as hypertextual as an actual book that you can um, move back and forth with. So there's the line is memorable. Characters are making your characters unforgettable. How do you make your characters unforgettable? What is the difference between Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment and just the average confused um, person in any old book? Um, First of all, there's the act that he performs. He kills somebody, and he kills a very specific lady in a very specific place. So making location specific or really specific is memorable. You always remember um, certain places that are in a book. If you read Orhan Pamuk, you will see those Turkish towns very clearly, and that's memorable. Um, so there's location can be memorable if it's very clearly defined, and a lot of it's a downside to a lot of contemporary literature that they ignore location. They ignore the landscape. Uh, Sadly, many people cannot describe landscape, and they're missing a big element of fiction and a memorable one. Um, it's sometimes when you read thrillers, detective stuff, it's sometimes the only thing you do remember is where it was set. It's set in the Keys, it's set in Baltimore, it's set in, um, Lagos, Nigeria. It's set in somewhere really specific, and that is might become the thing you remember about it is how vivid um, the location, the landscape is. Um, Definitely, elements of the plot are going to be really memorable. Um, I think of John le Carre. I just love John le Carre. I've, you know, read most of those books. I've, watched the movies and the TV series and stuff like that. And certain moments, that's in here, moments. So he talks about line and he talks about moments. So this is Comedy Writer by Andrew Nichols, who happens to be my husband, who has written this uh, wonderful book about comedy writing. And it applies to a lot of things. And the things that you remember, um, in a movie, it could be, a kind of a mic drop moment, just the expression on somebody's face. On the page, a moment is usually something happens and is given a very specific, often an object related memory. So, for instance, I always remember I believe it's Tinker Tailor, John le Carre, but it kind of recurs that Smiley is face to face with a Russian agent in Pakistan, India, who has been arrested. And what I remember is the guy smokes, uh, and Smiley gives him cigarettes and gives him his lighter. The lighter is signed with love from his wife, who is a cheater. So he has a lot of feeling about the wife and about the lighter, lets this guy have the lighter, and the guy pockets the lighter. He doesn't give it back. And he doesn't notice that. Smiley's very tired. And he doesn't notice that until he realizes later that that guy, who turns out to be his nemesis, Carla, the arch plotter on the Russian side, has kept his lighter. And we always remember that lighter. And I always remember that scene of the prisoner who doesn't, who turns out not to have returned the lighter. And then the lighter um, resurfaces is it in that book or in another book? But it resurfaces, and the lighter itself is memorable. Um, so there's also a moment of that. It could be a moment of a stolen kiss in a coat closet. It could be but it's got to be very visceral. It's got to be a thing. It's got to be tactile. Um, any kind of vagueness will not be remembered. When we remember, you know, what's a good moment in some of the books that you've read that um, you'll never forget. I think the eating of the beet in right out of the ground in Gone with the Wind. You know, I mean, the idea of like we can taste it. We can taste, hear how this woman has fallen and she's digging up beets out of the ground, somebody who had a zillion servants and whatever on the plantation. And she's on her knees and she's grown this and she eats it. And we can taste the dirt and the griminess and the grittiness. And, I'll never, and then the line, I'll never go hungry again. Um, what else do you remember? Moments. Uh, so line, moment. Um, Let me think about what I've been reading lately. Um, just someone's in a chess match, and you know, it's. I just read Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, which is a wonderful book. And there's a moment where this young chess champion takes uh, a, there's sort of a clamor in a regional arts hall where they've seen an exhibition game and everybody wants to talk to him and stuff. And he takes a moment to talk to a 9-year-old girl who wasn't too bad for a 9-year-old, um, and takes a moment to talk to her. And I'll always remember that about that book, that moment where Ivan talked to the young girl. Images, descriptions are often memorable. Yeah, yeah. Think about this is Ira. Hi, Ira. Um, Clearly memorable. And what else is what other moments in books that you've liked can you remember? Um, everybody remembers Tom Sawyer suckering his friends into whitewashing the fence. Um, they remember Amy in Little Women getting smacked across the knuckles for having limes, very, which were much treasured at her school during the Civil War, as you can imagine. And the teacher found her and smacked her, and she's not used to that. So that's memorable, both for the character and for the reader. Um, See comment above my last comment. Um, mhm. Taken down. Why would it be taken down? That's weird. Okay. Um, let's see. Moments. Um, and then there are scenes that are, unforgettable. Like the scene, in Anna Karenina where Vronsky rides his horse, basically breaks her back. He's riding her so hard in a race. Nobody ever forgets that scene. Um, oh, Sarah says Marina M. Oh, the character who meets an untimely end. Um, oh yeah, yeah. There's a very intense scene of death in Marina M, which Sarah's trying to spare the spoiler effect. But if you read Marina M or Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the second one, there is a um, yeah, there are a few deaths in there, and often the death of a character. Anything intense is what you're going to remember, especially if you were engaged with that person and they die. Otherwise, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of actioners, why they're dull, even though everybody is dying and getting blown up all over the place. We just don't care. We don't have any attachment to those people. So we really don't care. But if you're involved with somebody in a novel and they die, that's going to be an intense scene that will be memorable. Blood Meridian, Ira says. Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, the Legion of Horribles scene, a very memorable one. Very good. Um, I mean, all good books generally have memorable scenes or memorable moments. Scenes are easier. Moments are something that the writer doesn't always think about. We think about how to do a memorable scene. And it's always visceral. You know, people are not good at describing things so that a scene doesn't necessarily pay off the way it should because we weren't there. We were reading about it, but we weren't inside it. Um, let's see, memorable moments, realizations. When that scene where they realize, you know, um, and it could be just like they realize that the monster, you know, it's an alien that's popping out of somebody's chest. It's like, there's a moment. Um, on the page, um, and I can give a lot of movie examples, but we're more talking about fiction. Um, you know, the Magic Mountain, where his interaction with a young Russian woman at the sanatorium, very memorable. Some of the conversations, um, those are scenes, memorable conversations, you know, Dharma bums, the, you know, the situation of, you know, these late night bullshit sessions that the Beats would have, or climbing, going backpacking with Jeffy Ryder. And Kerouac is not in shape and he's a drinker. Uh, to go up on the mountain, that's a memorable scene. There's a memorable one in Big Sur where he's trying to dry out and he goes. He's in the fog and he's trying to reach Monsanto, who is Ferlinghetti, try to reach his cabin in Big Sur. And in the morning, the fog clears, and he looks up and he sees that that road was 1,000 feet above the where the cabin was, and it was a sheer drop, and he really could have lost it. Always remember that when the fog clears and he sees the drop. Very interesting. Uh, the reveal about one of the main characters in The Safe Keep, which is her top book this year, The Safe Keep, was so brilliant it made me cry and memorable. Um, memorable. So you have moment, and you know it's often a switch. There's a moment where something switches. Um, it's like the line in Damn Yankees where the devil lights a match for the first time for the protagonist, who's an old guy who wants to go back and be young and play for the Yankees, and it's like, I'm very handy with fire. Memorable line, memorable moment, and it's repeated uh, uh, to some good use. Um, yes, there's a lot in here on silly moments. Um, so, scene is where something changes. So often that is remembered. And it's also accompanied with a line, like, for instance, in The Secret Garden. I'm trying to use examples that people have seen. Secret, like examples where there are these two spoiled cousins, and one is more spoiled than the other. and they've both been the one, the angry one, who's the protagonist, has been living in India, and the other cousin is very imperious, and he is given a order to the servants, and on the staircase, a very a good shot and a good scene, and then he asks his cousin, what do you say in India when you want them to go away? Because everybody's still waiting for him to finish whatever he's going to say, and she says, we say, you know, I have spoken, all depart. I still can remember that. I have spoken, all depart. So Sarah asks, how long do you reread entire books as opposed to just skimming back through favorites? I'd say one in every 10 books is a reread, but often I will just go back, like after today, or if I'm having conversation like this with somebody my in my room, in the room or something, I will take it down and just look at the parts that are marked up, and just to enjoy them again. So less I reread the whole book, less than I just refer to these terrific scenes or these memorable lines. And so that's why it's important, because that's what you want your reader to do, is to have your book on the shelf and go, God, remember when she said blah, or remember that scene, and then you'll take it down to see that scene and see how it reverberates. It helps you remember the whole book. It's like the whole book is embodied in that lighter that he loses to Carla in John le Carré. Um, what other books? What are the most memorable scenes? Sometimes you look back and it's just a character, or you'll look back and it's like a scent or a flavor that is what you remember about the book, that it left you with a mood, and you want to experience that mood again, that more than specific lines or scenes. It's I'm in the mood for Paul Harding's Tinkers, which was a kind of a delicate book that dealt a lot with memory. Or I'm looking for a book like so and so, that there's a mood or a flavor. Um, there's certain, like when I say 100 Years of Solitude, do you remember specific scenes? Do you remember specific lines? At this remove, it's been a long time since I've read it. What I get is a flavor, a high color, a scent, kind of floral, moist, jungly, big, big, lush scenes, and certain colors like pop out. So what's memorable is, again, it's like a um, synthesis of the landscape and the dramas and the magic magical realism. Things that were magic that are taken by the reader as um, just fact and the way things are. Um, I do that with their magic characters can be very memorable. I read um, what's her first name? Contreras. It's an I. Um, okay, I'm not getting it. The man who Let's see if I can find it. The Man Who Could Move Clouds by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. I think of that book and the tropical lushness of it. It's a family where magic comes through the family, but it's supposed to come through the male line, and it's starting to move through the female line, and that's causing uproar. And the village that's way at the top of the mountain, which is where the poor people live, Brazilian style. This is Colombia, but it's in the days before cars and elevators and all this. The higher you went, the poorer you were because you had to climb. You had to climb that mountain every time you came home, carrying your groceries up. And and that was a really memorable book. It's why sometimes you can remember the book, but you can't remember um, an author's name or, God forbid, the name of the book. Because if it's not visceral, which a name is not visceral unless it has good consonants. We talk about crunchy language, and so should the title. What makes it a memorable title? Sometimes we just give up. We just can't get it, and we do the best we can. Um, Ingrid Rojas Contreras, The Man Who Could Move Clouds. That was a really memorable book. And sometimes it's subject matter. You remember if you like, if you like, you know, sorcery, you'll remember books that have good sorcery in it. If you like a love story, you'll remember the good love story. So sometimes it's plot, um, but people overlook the importance of line, moment, and scene, and the ending and the beginning. Like think about the books that have great last lines, or stories that have great last lines. What is the story of the women coming out of the sea? Was it Cheever? Um, People remember that line. I don't even remember the story, but I remember the line, or the last line of. I actually have in my writer's notebook, which I don't want to turn right now, but the great last lines in books. I went through my books and I just copied all of the great last lines and the great first lines. Let's see. Here's some ideas. Great last lines of books. Um, hmm. Oh, this is the Gatsby. Everybody remembers this. So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Is that brilliant? Uh, uh, so good. Um, and then beloved ends with beloved. So that's brilliant. You can call it, um, use your last line for a title. Um, Here's Call Me By Your Name. Uh, as you did back then, look me in the face, hold my gaze, and call me by your name. And the end of Catcher in the Rye. It's funny, don't ever tell anybody anything. If you do, you start missing everybody. And of course, that's what he's done in the book, is he's remembered it all. Um, God Bless Us Everyone, Christmas Carol. Um, the Color Purple. But I don't think us feel old at all, and us so happy. Matter of fact, I think this the youngest us ever felt. What was the end of Sound and the Fury? That's a memorable one. I don't want to get up right now. Let's see if I can get the ending online. I think it has a really good ending. It won't tell me. What a bunch of. Yeah. Um, so Sarah asks, are there certain elements in books that tend to draw you, personal taste, and make you want to read them? Not necessarily tropes, but specific settings, type of subjects, etc. Well, I can tell you what always thrills me. I like intensity. I like, you know, good language, crunchy language. I like good dialogue, that doesn't have a bunch of exposition and is a tight exchange. It doesn't just ramble down the page. Um, I, my personal taste, yeah, I tend to be attracted to um, certain elements in books. I like something that's somewhat, um, mm, I don't want to say dirty, in terms of porny or something, but it has a darkness. There'll be like an undercurrent of darkness in it. And I like characters who are introverted and do think about things in an interesting way. Um, how do you make a character memorable? That is a really interesting topic. It, that a beautiful girl is just a beautiful girl and instantly forgettable. You know, in fiction, it's, to make somebody distinctive is more important than to make them generically beautiful. You might remember the Bond girls um, in a movie because you've seen their faces and so on. But in a Bond book, only their names are memorable. Does anybody remember what Pussy Galore really looks like? No, we don't even remember her, but we sure remember her name. Oh, remember that she was a pilot. Um, it's what is specific about the person, rather than just handsome or whatever. Um, you'll remember a little curl in his hair at the hairline when he sweats. That little curl will save you. That's how you remember. How do you remember people in film? You'll remember certain things, and on the page, you remember other things. Say The Unbearable Lightness of Being, one of my faves. You'll remember the bowler hat and the bowler hat scene and making love with a bowler hat on, with the mirrors and all that. That is that's the film. In a book, what I remember is the heaviness of Teresa as she brings her emotional heaviness, because it's about lightness and heaviness. And Teresa shows up with her heavy suitcase and drags it up to the doctor's door. And I can just see this slight girl, pulling this huge suitcase, which is so metaphorical. Um, I remember mostly locations. I'm aware person, so I remember the way places look and smell and feel, and the light moving over things. But people, the nervousness, somebody who bites their nails to the quick. It's a tactile thing as well as a visual thing. Always remember that more than was he handsome? Did he have zits? Um, yeah, intermezzo, they go for a swim in freezing cold Irish water. And I'll always remember that just because, you know, the cold is bracing and will stick to me. Um, but so we have line, good lines, a good moment, an intense scene that's very visceral. Uh, Something happens that's often shocking. That's you remember that. The the last line, the first line, um, a vivid character who has quirks and is struggling. You usually remember them, um, what their intense problem is, um, their attitude. You remember a character with attitude as opposed to a character with no attitude. Um, I remember in Gary Steingart's super sad true love story, which I loved. Um, there was a scene where he brings the man in the vague future brings his lover, much younger, to his apartment in the future, and she looks at his books and just thinks books stink. Books are stinky. And it not only upsets the character, but usually it upsets the reader because tends to be readers. We are readers of the book, and we like our books. And then the shock of that somebody thinks that books smell, and the realization that yeah, there young many young people who have not been raised with books around them think books smell. It's shocking. So, that's a moment. Um, so, anyway, this has been a good uh, Writing Wednesday. And please go to your books and think about your favorite books and what are the moments? What are the lines? What are the scenes that really grab you? Get your writer's notebook, or if you're doing it online on your computer, your notebook, and look through your books and do the last line of your favorite books, the ones that you think have a great last line, a great first line, two different files, right? So good luck, and thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time for Writing Wednesday. And send me your questions, don't forget. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, please, because that gives me an idea of that I should keep doing this. Okay, thanks. Bye.